"Check the painting, sir." The boy's voice was soft enough that, for a moment, Arthur Pennington thought it had come from somewhere inside his own head, the way certain memories sometimes did when he stood alone in the long gallery of the East Wing. He was holding a glass of bourbon in his right hand, the ice not yet melted, and he had been studying the small oil painting of a winter harbor that his late wife had purchased in a quiet auction house in Boston the year before she died. The painting had hung in this same place for 19 years. He had walked past it perhaps 4,000 times. He had not really looked at it in at least 9. He turned slowly. The boy was standing just inside the wide oak doorway, one hand resting against the brass handle, his small shoulders held very still, the way a deer holds itself when it has not yet decided whether the danger in front of it is worth running from. He was perhaps 10 years old, maybe 11, in a clean white shirt that was a size too large and dark trousers that had been pressed, but not by someone with the right kind of iron. Arthur recognized him after a moment. The boy's grandmother had worked in the kitchen of the Pennington estate for nearly 30 years, and she had brought the child with her on weekends since the spring, when whatever arrangement had previously kept him elsewhere had quietly fallen apart. Arthur had nodded at him twice in the corridor outside the pantry. He had never spoken to him. "What did you say?" Arthur asked. The boy did not look away. There was no fear in his face exactly, but there was a great deal of effort. The effort of a child who had been told all his life to make himself smaller in rooms that did not belong to him, and who was now choosing, against every instinct his short life had given him, to be seen. "Check the painting, sir," he said again, more clearly this time. "The one in front of you. There's something behind it. I think you should look." Arthur set the glass of bourbon down on the small mahogany table beneath the painting. He did it slowly, with the deliberate motion of a man who had built his entire fortune on never being seen to flinch. He was 73 years old. He was the founder and chairman emeritus of Pennington Maritime Holdings, a shipping conglomerate whose vessels carried roughly 4% of the world's container freight across 3 oceans. He had been threatened, sued, slandered, and once, in 1987, shot at from across a parking lot in Singapore. He had never, in any of those moments, set down a glass of bourbon quickly. He did not do so now. "Son," he said in the calm and unhurried voice he reserved for negotiations that mattered, "come here a moment, walk slowly, don't run. What is your name?" "Elijah, sir, Elijah Boone." "Elijah." Arthur tested the name in his mouth the way he tested the name of any man who had just walked uninvited into the most private room of his house. "Elijah, how did you come to be in the East Wing this evening?" The boy walked across the long stretch of polished oak floor until he was standing perhaps 3 feet away from Arthur. He smelled faintly of the rosewater soap that Arthur's housekeeper kept in the staff bathroom near the back stairs, and his hair had been combed carefully and recently with water, the small comb tracks still visible above his left ear. Arthur understood without needing to ask that the boy had washed and prepared himself before coming up here, because he had wanted to look proper when he told a stranger that something in the stranger's own home was not what it appeared to be. "My grandma sent me to bring the silver back to the cabinet in the front parlor," Elijah said. "I came through the gallery because it's shorter. I was carrying the tray and I stopped here because the tray was heavy and my arms were tired. While I was standing here, I looked up at this painting because it's the one with the boats and I like boats, and I saw something." "What did you see?" The boy lifted one small finger and pointed, not quite touching the gilded frame. "The wall behind it doesn't match, sir. The shadow underneath is wrong, and there's a line along the edge that wasn't there last Saturday. I know because I stood in this exact spot last Saturday too, and the painting was hung different. Somebody moved it. And whoever moved it didn't put it back the same way." Arthur Pennington felt, for the first time in 19 years, the small cold weight of something he could not immediately name settle in the center of his chest. Arthur did not move for a long moment. He looked at the painting the way a man looks at a face he has known all his life and is suddenly seeing in different light. The frame was the same gilded oak it had always been, with the small carved acorns at each corner that his wife Elinor had loved enough to point out to dinner guests for years. The canvas itself, no larger than a folded newspaper, showed a winter harbor in pale grays and bone whites, 3 small fishing vessels at anchor under a sky that promised snow. But the shadow. The boy was right. Arthur saw it now that he was looking. The shadow beneath the bottom edge of the frame fell perhaps a quarter of an inch wider on the left side than on the right. It was the kind of detail a man would miss every day of his life, unless he had been standing in this exact spot for a particular reason, with his arms tired and his eyes drifting upward, on a quiet evening when the lamps in the gallery were lit at their lowest setting. "Elijah," Arthur said quietly, "how old are you?" 10, sir." 11 in March." "Where did you learn to look at things this way?" The boy hesitated. He glanced once toward the doorway, the small reflexive glance of a child who had been raised to know that long answers were rarely welcome in rooms like this one. Then he seemed to decide something, and he met Arthur's eyes. "My daddy was a framer, sir. Not picture frames, house frames. He built houses. He used to take me to the sites on Saturdays before he passed, and he told me that anybody can look at a wall, but only a builder can tell when a wall is lying. He said the truth of a thing is always in the edges, the corners, the places where 2 pieces are supposed to meet. If the edges don't sit right, somebody has done something to it, and they didn't want you to notice." Arthur was quiet for a moment. "And what do the edges of this painting tell you?" "They tell me somebody took it down, sir, recently, and whoever put it back didn't measure. They eyeballed it, and there's something else." The boy lowered his voice, not from fear but from the natural caution of a child who understood that some sentences ought to be carried gently. "The wall behind it isn't the same color as the wall on either side. It's a little darker. Like there used to be something underneath the paint and somebody covered it up, but not enough." Arthur looked at the wall on either side of the frame. The boy was right about that too. The plaster ran in a continuous pale cream along the entire length of the gallery, 22 feet of it, except for a small rectangle directly behind the painting where the cream was perhaps half a shade deeper, the way old paint goes when it has been applied over something that did not want to be smooth. Arthur reached out and rested his fingertips on the lower edge of the frame. He did not lift it. He simply touched it the way a doctor touches a patient before he begins to ask the harder questions. "Elijah," he said, "I want you to do something for me. I want you to step back about 3 paces and stand by that chair near the window. Don't leave the room. Don't go and find your grandmother yet. I'm going to take this painting down, and I want a witness in the room when I do it. Do you understand what a witness is?" "Yes, sir. Somebody who sees." "That is exactly right." The boy stepped back. He folded his hands in front of him, the way a child folds his hands at the beginning of grace. Arthur lifted the painting carefully from the wall. The painting came away from the wall with a small, dry sound, the soft separation of old felt pads from plaster they had pressed against for 19 years. Arthur held it carefully in both hands, the way a man holds something his wife had loved, and stepped 2 paces back so that he could see what the frame had been hiding. For a long moment he did not understand what he was looking at. There was a square cut into the wall, not a hole exactly, a door. A small recess panel, perhaps 10 inches by 12, its edges fitted so precisely into the plaster that even now, with the painting removed, a man would have to know it was there in order to find it. The seam ran along 3 sides in a line so fine it could have been mistaken for a crack in old paint. Along the 4th side, the bottom, there was a small brass hinge no larger than a coat button, painted over so many times that it had nearly disappeared into the wall itself. Arthur had not put this panel here. He stood very still. He was a man who had lived in this house for 41 years. He had walked past this wall, and the wall behind this wall, and the corridor on the other side of this wall, 10,000 times. He had hung this painting himself with a leaner on a Saturday afternoon in October of 2006, and he remembered the moment with the kind of clarity that a man remembers small, ordinary days after the person who shared them has gone. There had been no panel in the wall on that Saturday. He was certain of it, which meant someone had cut this panel into the wall after a leaner had died, after Arthur had stopped coming into the East Wing for the better part of 3 years, After the house had become, in his own quiet absence, a place where things could be done without him knowing. "Sir," the boy's voice was soft from across the room. "I see it, Elijah, I see it." Arthur set the painting down with great care on the upholstered bench beneath the window. He turned back to the wall. He stood in front of the small panel for perhaps 15 seconds without moving. He was not afraid. He was something stranger than afraid. He was a man who had just discovered that the house he had believed to be the safest place in his life had been keeping a secret from him, possibly for years, and the secret had been kept by someone he trusted enough to let inside these walls. He reached out and pressed his thumb gently against the lower edge of the panel. It did not move. He pressed harder. "Nothing, sir," Elijah said quietly from the chair. "My daddy used to say that the hinges on a hidden door usually open the opposite way you expect. Try pushing the top corner instead." Arthur looked at the boy. Then he reached up and pressed his thumb against the upper left corner of the panel. The panel clicked. It swung outward perhaps an inch, slow and silent on a small spring mechanism that someone had paid good money to install. Arthur caught the edge with his fingertips and opened it the rest of the way. Inside the cavity, set neatly into a small wooden frame that had been built directly into the wall, was a recess about the size of a shoebox. And inside the recess, stacked in a way that suggested someone had placed them there carefully and recently, were 3 things. A slim brown envelope sealed. A small black ledger, the kind a bookkeeper might keep, bound in cracked leather. And beneath them both, wrapped in a square of dark blue velvet, the unmistakable shape of a key. Arthur Pennington stood in front of the open cavity and looked at the 3 objects for a long time. He did not touch any of them. He understood, in the way that men of his age and experience come to understand certain things without needing them explained, that whatever was inside that envelope and that ledger was going to change the rest of his life. Behind him, the boy waited quietly by the window. Arthur did not reach into the cavity. Not yet. He had spent half a century in rooms where the wrong fingerprint on the wrong document could undo years of careful work, and the instinct held even now in his own house, in front of his own wall. He stepped back 1 pace and looked at the small recess from a slight distance, the way a man looks at a chessboard when he has just realized the game has been going on longer than he thought. "Elijah," he said quietly, without turning, "I'm going to ask you to do one more thing for me. There is a telephone on the small table by the door, the one with the green shade. I want you to pick it up and press the button marked 4. Do not say anything when the line is answered. Just hand me the receiver. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." The boy crossed the room. Arthur heard the small click of the receiver being lifted, the soft chime of the internal line, the quiet padding of the boy's feet as he walked back. Arthur took the receiver without looking away from the wall. "Marguerite," he said. The voice on the other end belonged to his housekeeper of 26 years, a woman who had begun her employment when Billionaire was still alive, and who had, in the long quiet years since, become something closer to family than staff. She was somewhere downstairs, probably in the kitchen, where she spent the hour before dinner reviewing the next day's menus with a small pencil and a notepad she had been using since 2011. "Mr. Pennington, Marguerite, I would like you to do 3 things in this order without asking questions. First, I would like you to find Mrs. Boone and tell her that her grandson is with me in the East Gallery and that he is perfectly safe. He is helping me with a small matter and he will be down within the hour. Second, I would like you to walk to my study and lock the door from the inside. Stay there. Do not answer the door for anyone but me. Third, when you are inside the study, I would like you to open the bottom drawer of the desk and remove the small black telephone that is not connected to the house line. Bring it to the door of the East Gallery and slide it underneath. Do not knock. Do not enter." There was a pause of perhaps 2 seconds. "Yes, Mr. Pennington. Thank you, Marguerite." He set the receiver down. He turned and looked at the boy. Elijah was watching him with the same still attention he had brought into the room, but there was something new in his face now. Not fear, understanding. The boy had heard the instructions and had understood. in the way that certain children understand things they should not yet have to understand, that the man standing in front of the wall was preparing for something more serious than a moved painting. "Sir," Elijah said carefully, "are you in trouble?" Arthur considered the question. He had been asked it many times in his life by lawyers, by reporters, by his own children when they were small. He had always given the same answer, which was the answer that men in his position were trained to give, and which was almost always a lie. He gave the boy a different answer. "I do not yet know, Elijah, but I believe someone in this house has done something they should not have done, and I believe they have been doing it for some time. You have helped me find the first proof of it. I am going to take this very slowly now, because the next few hours matter." The boy nodded once, the small, serious nod of a child who had been spoken to as an equal for perhaps the first time in his life. Arthur turned back to the cavity in the wall. He took a clean white handkerchief from his breast pocket, unfolded it carefully, and wrapped it around his right hand. Then he reached into the recess and lifted out the slim brown envelope. It was heavier than he had expected. He carried it to the small writing desk beneath the window, set it down on the leather blotter, and stood looking at it for one long moment before he reached for the silver letter opener that had belonged to his grandfather. Arthur slid the letter opener carefully along the upper edge of the envelope. The paper parted with a small, clean sound, the sound that good stationery makes when it has been waiting for a long time to be opened. He set the opener down. He drew out the contents. There were 3 items inside. The first was a folded document on heavy cream paper, the kind used by law firms that charged by the quarter hour. The second was a small black and white photograph, perhaps 4 inches square, that had been taken with a film camera and developed on the kind of paper that no one printed on anymore. The third was a handwritten note on a single sheet torn from a yellow legal pad. Arthur read the note first. The handwriting was Eleanor's. He stood very still. He had not seen his wife's handwriting in 19 years, except on the small cards she had tucked into birthday boxes for the children, which he kept in a leather case in his bedroom. He recognized the shape of her letters the way a man recognizes the voice of his mother across a crowded room. The note was short. It said, "Arthur, if you are reading this, then either I left it for you to find, or someone has done what I was afraid they would do. I hope it is the first. If it is the second, look at the photograph. The man on the right is the one to start with. The ledger will tell you the rest. I am sorry I did not tell you while I could. I thought I had more time." The note was dated April 11, 2007, 6 months before she had died. Arthur set the note down on the blotter. He did not pick up the photograph yet. He stood with both hands flat on the leather and breathed in once slowly, the way a man breathes when he has just learned that the woman he had loved for 40 years had been carrying a weight by herself that she had not been able to give him in time. "Sir," the boy's voice was very quiet from across the room. "I am all right, Elijah. Give me a moment." He gave himself the moment. He took it. Then he picked up the photograph. It showed 2 men standing on the front steps of a building Arthur did not immediately recognize. The image was slightly grainy, taken from across a street perhaps, the angle suggesting that the photographer had not wanted to be seen. The man on the left was a stranger to Arthur. Tall, gaunt, in a dark overcoat, with a face that gave nothing away. The man on the right was holding a briefcase. He was perhaps 50 years old in the photograph, with a neat mustache and dark hair combed back from a high forehead, and Arthur recognized him at once. His name was Reginald Hatch. He had been the chief counsel of Pennington Maritime Holdings for 31 years. He had stood at Eleanor's funeral. He had carried one of the small bouquets the grandchildren had made. He had cried, or had seemed to cry, in the front pew of the church. Arthur turned the photograph over. On the back, in Eleanor's small, precise hand, were 4 words: Geneva, March 2007, Graylin. Arthur knew the name. Graylin Holdings was a small private investment fund based in Liechtenstein that had appeared briefly in the periphery of one of the company's audits in 2009. It had been flagged once and then quietly cleared by the audit committee. Reginald had personally written the memo that cleared it. Arthur set the photograph down beside the note. He looked at the third item, the folded cream document. He opened it. It was a copy of an account agreement. The account had been opened in Geneva in February of 2007. It was in the name of a corporation Arthur had never heard of, but the signature on the bottom line was familiar. He had seen it on 10,000 contracts over 31 years. It was Reginald Hatch's signature. And the balance of the account, as of the most recent statement included with the agreement, was just under $412 million. Arthur folded the document carefully. He folded it back along the same creases it had been folded along for 19 years. He set it down on top of the note and the photograph. Then he turned toward the cavity in the wall and reached for the ledger. The ledger was small, no larger than a man's hand, bound in cracked black leather that had darkened along the edges from years of being handled, and then, more recently, from years of not being handled at all. Arthur carried it to the desk and set it down beside the photograph. He did not open it immediately. He looked at it the way a man looks at a door that he knows will not close again once he has walked through it. From the doorway came the soft sound of something sliding across the floor. Arthur turned. A small black telephone, no larger than a deck of playing cards, lay just inside the threshold of the gallery. Marguerite had done exactly what he had asked, and she had done it without making her footsteps heard, which was one of the small skills she had developed in 26 years of working in a house where the master sometimes needed not to be approached. "Elijah," Arthur said quietly, "would you bring that to me, please?" The boy crossed the room and picked up the phone with both hands, the way he had picked up the chocolate milk that he was not in this story holding, but that, in some other version of this evening, he might have been. He carried it to the desk and set it down beside the ledger. "Thank you." Arthur picked up the phone. He held it for a moment without dialing. He was deciding, in the small private way that men of his position decided things, whether to make the call he had been preparing to make for 19 years without knowing he had been preparing for it. He dialed. The line picked up on the second ring. "Arthur." The voice belonged to a man named Caldwell Finch, who had been Arthur's personal attorney for 36 years and who lived in a small stone house on a hill above the harbor about 11 miles from the estate. Caldwell did not work for Pennington Maritime Holdings. He had never worked for the company. He worked only for Arthur, and he had been chosen for that role in 1988 precisely because he had no relationship with anyone else inside the corporate structure. Arthur had paid him quietly for 36 years to be the one man whose loyalty could not be purchased by anyone else in his life. "Caldwell, I need you at the house tonight. Come up the back lane. Park behind the carriage shed. Do not come through the front gate. Do not call my office in the morning. Do not speak to Reginald Hatch under any circumstances between now and when you walk through my door." There was a pause on the line. Caldwell Finch was 78 years old. He had not been surprised by anything in perhaps 20 years. "How long do I have, Arthur?" "As long as it takes you to drive 11 miles in the dark without being seen. I will be in the East Gallery. Marguerite will let you in through the kitchen door. Bring the small recorder. Bring the notarial seal. Bring everything you would bring if I had called you to say that I was about to die tonight and needed to put my affairs in order. I will be there in 40 minutes. Thank you." Arthur set the phone down. He looked at the boy. Elijah was standing very straight beside the desk, his hands folded in front of him. His eyes lowered the small, respectful fraction that he had been taught to lower them in rooms where adults were speaking of serious things. Arthur understood, looking at him, that the boy had been quietly listening to every word of the call and had quietly understood most of them. Whatever else had happened in Elijah Boone's 10 years of life, he had not been raised in a household where children were treated as if they could not understand the weight of what the grown-ups said. "Elijah." "Yes, sir." "I am going to open this ledger now. I do not know what is inside it. I want you to stand here beside me while I do it. I am asking you because you found this, and I believe a thing should be looked at first by the person who found it, and second by the person who owns the wall it was hidden in. Is that all right?" The boy nodded. Arthur opened the ledger. The first page was a date, October 2006. The second page was a list of names. The names were written in Aline's hand, in the small, careful script that Arthur had read on grocery lists and birthday cards and the inside covers of books for 40 years. There were 14 names on the page. Some of them Arthur recognized at once. Others he did not. Beside each name was a date, and beside each date a small notation in Aline's private shorthand, the kind she had used in her own diaries. At the top of the page, underlined twice, were 3 words. People Reginald paid. Arthur read the list slowly. He took his time. He had learned long ago that the wrong reading of a document under stress was worse than no reading at all. He went down the page one name at a time, and he held each one in his mind for a moment before he moved to the next. 3 of the names belonged to men who had served on the board of Pennington Maritime Holdings between 2004 and 2007. 2 of them were still alive. One had died of natural causes in 2019. 4 of the names belonged to auditors from the firm that had handled the company's books during that same period. One of the names belonged to a federal regulator who had retired in 2008 and had since taken a comfortable position at a consulting firm that, Arthur now realized, had been quietly funded through one of Grayland's subsidiaries. The remaining names were unfamiliar to him, but the notations beside them suggested journalists, a judge, and 2 members of a foreign trade ministry. Arthur turned the page. The second page was a summary of payments, dates, amounts. The amounts ranged from $40,000 to slightly over $2 million. The total at the bottom of the page, written in Aline's small neat figures, came to just under $18 million, across a span of 8 months in 2006 and 2007. Arthur turned the page again. The third page was a single paragraph in Aline's handwriting, dated April 9, 2007, 2 days before the note she had left in the envelope. Arthur, I found the first transfer by accident in November. I thought it was a mistake. I asked Reginald about it at the Christmas party. He told me it was a structured tax shelter and not to trouble myself. I did not believe him. I began to keep this book in January. I have not told you because I wanted to be sure. I am almost sure now. The money is not the company's. The money is yours. He has been moving it out of the personal trust, not the corporate accounts, and he has been doing it for longer than the dates in this book. I do not know how far back it goes. I do not know who else inside the firm is helping him. I am going to tell you on Sunday after church. If something happens to me between now and Sunday, please find Caldwell and give him this book. I love you. Arthur read the paragraph twice. Then he sat down slowly in the small upholstered chair beside the desk. He had not sat down in this gallery in many years. The chair was lower than he remembered. He let his weight settle into it and put both hands flat on his knees. Aline had died on a Saturday morning, April 14, 2007, 3 days after she had written the note. 2 days before the Sunday she had planned to tell him. She had died of an aneurysm. The coroner had been certain. There had been no question at the time, and there had been no question in the 19 years since. But she had written, if something happens to me. Arthur sat for a long moment in the chair. The boy stood quietly beside him and did not speak. There are certain silences that children understand better than adults do, and Elijah Boone understood this one. He simply stood with his hands folded and waited for the old man in the chair to be ready to stand up again. After perhaps 2 minutes, Arthur lifted his head. Elijah, he said quietly, I want you to go and find your grandmother. Tell her I asked you to wait with her in the kitchen until Mr. Finch arrives. He will be here within the hour. When he comes, I would like you to come back upstairs with him. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Thank you. For everything you have done tonight. The boy hesitated at the doorway. He turned back. Sir, she loved you very much, I can tell from how she wrote. Arthur looked at him. Yes, he said. She did. The boy left. Arthur sat alone in the gallery for a long time after the boy had gone. He did not move from the chair. He did not pick up the ledger again. He looked at the small painting of the Winter Harbor that he had taken down from the wall, now resting on the upholstered bench beneath the window, and he thought about the Saturday afternoon in October of 2006 when he and Aline had hung it together. He remembered that she had asked him twice whether it was level. He remembered that he had teased her for being particular. He remembered that she had laughed and said that a painting hung crooked told the truth about the people who lived with it, and that she preferred her truths to be deliberate. He understood now that she had not been speaking about decoration. She had been telling him, on that Saturday in October, that she was about to begin doing something deliberate. And she had chosen this wall in this gallery behind this painting because she had known that Arthur would walk past it every day of his life and would never, in his ordinary attention, look closely enough to find what she had hidden there. She had also known, Arthur realized now, that if anything happened to her before she could tell him, the painting would stay on the wall for as long as he lived in the house. Because it was hers. Because he would not move it. Because the same loyalty that had made him a difficult man to deceive in business had made him, in his grief, a man who left her things exactly where she had left them. She had counted on his grief to keep the hiding place safe. She had also counted, in some quieter corner of her planning, on someone eventually noticing what he could not. She had not known it would be a 10-year-old boy carrying a tray of silver through a shortcut in a gallery he did not belong in. But she had trusted, in the way that certain women trusted the world, that the right kind of person would eventually walk past and look up. Arthur stood. His knees ached the way they ached more often now than they used to. He walked to the window and looked out across the long sloping lawn that ran down to the line of old elms at the edge of the property. The sky above the elms had gone the deep blue of an evening that was not quite night. Somewhere beyond the elms, on the small back lane that wound through the woods, a pair of headlights was moving slowly toward the house with their beams turned down. Caldwell Finch had made the 11 miles in 36 minutes. Arthur turned away from the window. He walked to the desk and picked up the ledger, the envelope, the photograph, and the note. He carried them carefully to the small safe that was set into the wall behind a hinged section of the bookshelf, a safe that Reginald Hatch had never known existed, because Arthur had installed it himself in 1979 without consulting anyone, including, at the time, Billionaire. He keyed the combination. He placed the items inside. He closed the safe and turned the dial. Then he reached into the cavity in the wall one more time and lifted out the small bundle wrapped in dark blue velvet. He unfolded the velvet on the desk. Inside was a key. It was an old key, brass, heavier than it looked, with a square shank and an unusual cut along the bit. Arthur recognized it at once, though he had not seen one like it in many years. It was the key to a safe deposit box at a particular bank in a particular city, a bank that Billionaire's family had used for 3 generations, and that Arthur himself had not stepped inside since 1994. There was a small paper tag tied to the key with a length of plain white string. On the tag, in Billionaire's hand, were 2 words, "The rest." Arthur held the key in his palm for a long moment. He understood that whatever was in the safe deposit box was the part Billionaire had not been able to fit into a ledger or an envelope. The part she had needed to keep in a place that no one inside the house and no one inside the firm could reach without her key. She had left him a map. He closed his fingers around the brass. From somewhere below, in the long, quiet hallway that led from the kitchen to the east stairs, came the small, careful sound of 2 sets of footsteps. One of them was the slow, measured tread of a 78-year-old attorney climbing stairs he had not climbed in a long time. The other was the lighter step of a 10-year-old boy. Arthur slipped the key into the inside pocket of his jacket. He walked to the door of the gallery and opened it. Caldwell Finch came into the gallery the way he came into every room, slowly, deliberately, with his hat already in his hand. He was a tall man who had grown slightly bent in the past decade, but who still carried himself with the upright dignity of a generation that had been taught to stand straight in the presence of bad news. He wore a dark gray overcoat and carried a small leather satchel that Arthur had seen perhaps 4 times in their 36 years of friendship. The satchel came out only for the matters that could not be put into letters. Behind him, Elijah Boone walked quietly, his small hands once again folded in front of him. "Arthur," Caldwell said. "Caldwell, thank you for coming." The 2 men did not embrace. They had never embraced. They had stood at 3 funerals together and at the bedside of Arthur's daughter when she had been very ill in 1996, and they had never embraced. It was not the kind of friendship that needed it. Caldwell looked at the boy and then at the open cavity in the wall and then at Arthur. His eyes did not widen. They never did. "Tell me," he said. Arthur told him. He told him in 12 minutes. He left nothing out. He walked Caldwell to the safe behind the bookshelf, opened it, and laid the ledger, the envelope, the photograph, the note, and the key out on the desk in the same order he had found them. Caldwell read each item the way he read all documents, once quickly, once slowly, once with a small pencil in his hand. When he was finished, he set the pencil down and looked at Arthur for a long moment. "Billionaire," he said quietly. "Yes. She came to my office in March of 2007. She did not tell me why. She asked me a hypothetical question about fiduciary duty within a personal trust and the obligations of counsel who served both the trust and the company that funded it. I told her what the law required. I did not understand at the time what she was asking. I understand now." Arthur nodded slowly. "Caldwell, I need 3 things from you tonight. First, I need a sworn statement of what is in this room and how it was found. I want the boy's account recorded in his own words, and I want it witnessed by you and notarized. Second, I need a quiet hold placed on every account that Reginald has signing authority over, beginning at the opening of business tomorrow morning. I will sign whatever you need me to sign tonight. Third, I need a private investigator in this house by midnight, not one of ours. Someone outside the firm, someone you trust personally. I know the man." "Good." Caldwell opened the satchel. He drew out a small recorder, a leather folder of blank affidavit forms, and the heavy brass notarial seal that he had carried in his pocket since 1972. He set them on the desk with the unhurried care of a man who had learned long ago that legal weight, properly applied, traveled further than any other kind of pressure a wealthy man could bring to bear. He turned to the boy. "Young man," he said, "my name is Mr. Finch. I am Mr. Pennington's lawyer. I am going to ask you some questions, and I am going to write your answers down on this piece of paper. When we are finished, I am going to read the answers back to you, and if I have written them down correctly, I am going to ask you to sign your name at the bottom. Is that all right?" "Yes, sir." "Have you ever signed your name on a legal document before?" "No, sir." "Then this will be the first. It is an important first. Do you understand what it means to tell the truth under oath?" "Yes, sir. It means you tell the truth even when nobody would know if you didn't." Caldwell looked at the boy for one long moment, then he looked at Arthur. Something passed between the 2 old men that did not need to be spoken. "That is exactly what it means," Caldwell said quietly. "Sit down, son. Take your time." The boy sat in the small chair beside the desk. Caldwell sat across from him. Arthur stood by the window and watched the elms at the bottom of the lawn while the lawyer and the boy began, in quiet, careful sentences, to put the evening into the kind of record that a court of law would one day read. Outside, somewhere beyond the elms, the first stars of the night had begun to show. What happened in the weeks that followed moved with the patient, deliberate weight that only old money and older lawyers can bring to a matter that has been waiting 19 years to be answered. Reginald Hatch was not arrested in his office. He was not arrested at all at first. Caldwell Finch did not believe in noise. He believed in paper. By the end of the first week, every account that Reginald had touched in 3 decades had been quietly frozen by a court order that no one in the firm had seen coming. By the end of the second week, the contents of Billionaire's safe deposit box had been opened in the presence of 3 federal investigators and 2 forensic accountants, and what was inside had filled 6 bankers' boxes. By the end of the third week, the indictment ran to 241 pages and named 11 defendants, of whom Reginald was only the first. The aneurysm that had killed Billionaire Pennington in April of 2007 was re-examined by a pathologist whose name Arthur was never given. The pathologist's report, when it came, was careful in the way that such reports are careful when they cannot prove what they suspect. It said that the original finding could not be ruled out, but that certain pharmacological possibilities had not been tested for at the time and could no longer be tested for now. It said that the matter would have to remain in the official record as it had been recorded in 2007. Arthur read the report once. Then he folded it and put it in the safe behind the bookshelf, beside Eleanor's ledger. He understood that some questions, once asked too late, become a different kind of answer. He did not speak of it again. Reginald Hatch pleaded guilty in the autumn to 17 of the 43 charges against him. He did so in exchange for the cooperation that brought down the remaining 10 defendants. He was sentenced to 22 years in a federal facility. He was 68 years old at the time of sentencing. Arthur did not attend the hearing. He had said everything he needed to say in a single letter that Caldwell had delivered to Reginald's attorney 3 weeks earlier, the contents of which were never made public and never will be. The $412 million in the Geneva account, along with the considerably larger sum that had been traced through the safe deposit box, was recovered in full. Arthur did not return it to the personal trust. He placed it, instead, into a foundation that he established in Eleanor's name in the spring of the following year. The foundation's stated mission was simple. It funded the education of children whose parents worked in domestic service, in the building trades, in the kitchens and the gardens and the back stairwells of the houses of men like Arthur Pennington. The first scholarship was awarded to a boy named Elijah Boone. Mrs. Boone, his grandmother, did not retire from the kitchen, though Arthur offered. She said that she had cooked in that kitchen for 30 years, and she was not yet ready to cook anywhere else. She did, however, accept the small cottage at the edge of the property that Arthur offered her and her grandson, and she accepted it on the condition that she would continue to pay a token rent, which Arthur, after some negotiation, agreed to. Elijah was enrolled in a small private school 8 miles from the estate that Arthur had supported quietly for many years. He took to it slowly, the way a careful child takes to any new room. By the end of his 2nd year, he was at the top of his class in mathematics and was beginning to read the kind of books that surprised his teachers. By the end of his 4th year, he had asked, of his own accord, whether he might one day study architecture because his father had been a builder, and because he had been thinking, for some time, about the truths that lived in the edges of things. Arthur lived for 11 more years after the evening the painting came down from the wall. He spent many of those years in the gallery. He had the small painting of the Winter Harbor restored and rehung in its old place, though he never again allowed it to be touched by anyone but himself. He sat in the upholstered chair beside the desk in the long, quiet afternoons, and sometimes he read, and sometimes he did not. He hosted Elijah Boone for tea every Sunday that the boy was in town from school, and they spoke of harbors and houses, and the small, careful business of paying attention to what other people did not see. There are stories we tell about the great houses of the world. We say that their secrets are kept by their owners. We say that wealth protects itself, that power knows its own shadows, that the men who build empires always know what is hidden inside their own walls. It is not true. The secrets of the great houses are kept, almost always, by the people who clean their floors and carry their trays and walk through their galleries with tired arms on quiet evenings. The truths of those houses are hidden in plain sight, behind paintings that have not been moved in 19 years, in shadows that fall a quarter of an inch wider on one side than the other, in the small details that only a child raised by a careful mother and a builder father will ever think to look up and notice. Pay attention to the ones who walk through your rooms unseen. Learn the names of the children of the women who cook your meals. The next time someone small and quiet stands in your doorway and tells you that something in your own house is not what it appears to be, set down your glass. Listen. The bravest voice in any room is almost never the loudest one, and sometimes all it takes to set right a wrong that has waited 2 decades for the light is 4 words, spoken softly by a boy who refused to walk past. If this story moved you, please tap the like button, share it with someone who needs to be reminded to look up at the walls of their own life, and subscribe to the channel so the next story finds you. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and remember always to listen to the small voices in your life. You never know which one might tell you the truth that everyone else has missed.